Hey, hello LinkedIn and YouTube. This is really exciting. I'm live here with Kat Place, head teacher at Jubilee Park Primary School. I'm just going to do a short introduction and then hand over to Kat to introduce herself. So I'm Becky Carlson. I run 2 online learning communities for teachers and leaders. One's called Learning Pioneers, one's called Press Play. Work with Kat quite closely because Kat's in our masterminds in Learning Pioneers. And we're really excited today to look at Kat's doctoral research into creating the conditions to thrive. And we're going to be mining Kat for information about how we can create more well-being in our schools, more of a culture of collaboration, and just really intentionally make our schools wonderful places to work and learn in. So Kat, I'm going to hand over to you. Could you introduce yourself? And we're going to set some intentions too. So Kat's going to introduce herself and set an intention.
Thanks, Becky. Prynhainda. As Becky said, I'm Kat Place. I'm head teacher at Jubilee Park Primary School in Newport in South Wales. And I'm also just coming to the end of being a doctoral student at the University of Wales Trinity St David. So I've spent 6.5 years researching wellbeing, collaboration and teacher wellbeing, and recently survived my Viva. So very excited to share that. Very recently, only about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I've got lots to be talking about this afternoon. And in terms of my intention, I just hope that I'm clear. I think that's, I'm coming for clarity, and hopefully that'll make sense to people that are tuning in, but also to look at things through a positive perspective, because as I just said to Becky off camera, I'm fed up with the doom and gloom surrounding our profession.
Lovely, Kat. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to build on your intention. So what you said, and I think we share, tell me if you don't think we share, but I think we share the kind of the belief that we can be empowered through our profession, and that through really understanding pedagogy and research and what teachers have to say and what students have to say, we can put that into action in our schools and classrooms, no matter what is going on in the wider world and what outside agencies have to say. So what I hope that this conversation enables people to feel empowered and like they can take actions to make a difference. And I'm sure that's going to come from our conversation. So also, in terms of the clarity as well, if you're on LinkedIn, you can comment and we will see your comments. So if we're not being clear, ask questions, share your thinking. If you want to add questions, put them into the chat. We'll thread them all into the conversation. We have a few kind of questions to explore, but you can help shape that. So you're very welcome to do that. So tiny bit of context. This has come off the back of a hot seat in our masterminds in Learning Pioneers, where one of our mastermind crew where Kat was asking about Kat's doctorate, and we ran a hot seat just kind of asking Kat questions. And we normally talk for like 20 minutes in a hot seat, but we knew this needs blowing up. And he's celebrating. There was so much. People left with more questions than when they started. They were more curious than when they started. So this is like an exploded version of that. So first of all, Kat, let's just kind of ground things a little bit in terms of what have you been researching and what, what's the title of your doctorate? What have you been finding out? And just kind of place that a little bit so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, no problem. So my title of my doctorate, of my thesis, is exploring the interrelationship between organisational culture, collaboration and teacher wellbeing through narrative inquiry. And I framed that around the phrase creating the conditions to thrive. I suppose where's that come from? Creating the conditions to thrive is also one of the vision principles for my school. So I had quite a unique opportunity of opening my school as a brand new school and a brand new housing community in September 2017. And very much I sort of set off with the mindset of I want this school to feel different and be different. And by that, I mean focused on learning. And it sounds quite ironic saying that schools should be focused on learning, but we know quite often schools are not focused on learning and you get dragged into other things. And particularly as a head teacher, you can quite quickly feel you're getting dragged away from your core business, your core purpose. So creating the conditions to thrive is really thinking about what are those things, those systems and processes that we can put in place as school leaders that not only support the children to thrive, but also look at the adults within that school context. In terms of narrative inquiry, that was just been fascinating, and I'm sure we'll talk in more detail about that. But the essence is about storied lives and why storied lives are so important. And my study captures the lived experiences of teachers based in one primary school and one secondary school in South East Wales. But I've also interwoven my own positionality as a head teacher through the research as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Kat. And I'm just like thinking 6 years of research, right? That's how long I mean, that is a lot that you've been digging into. So we'll try and distill it into like an hour and a half. We'll try our best. Can we dig a bit more into narrative inquiry then, what it is and why you kind of chose to take that stance?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that my doctoral program was framed was the first couple of years was very much like taught modules where you get to experience lots of different ways of working as a researcher, and then you join what they call the doctoral college after the first 3 years. So in those first 3 years, I was looking into lots of different methodology, and what I knew from my heart right from the beginning was that I am a social constructivist. So I fundamentally believe in learning being dynamic and co-constructed. And I believe that the way that the world is structured is due to collaboration and interrelationships with other people. I don't have this one fixed view of the world and this is a yes, this is a no, this is the answer, this is the other way of thinking. I really believe in that socially dependentness, if that's even a word, of the way that humans interrelate. So I looked at lots of different methodology. I had a pilot study that looked at my own school as a case study. And although I really enjoyed it, I still had this niggle that it wasn't quite the methodology that I really wanted to focus on. And then through working really closely with my supervisors, they introduced me to this idea of narrative inquiry, and I felt like I'd come home. It's the only way I can describe it. You know, when you get that sense of something that really resonates with you. The idea of narrative inquiry is that it's a way of representing and interpreting experience. So it really focuses on that idea of being in the midst. So in the midst of your life, in that retelling and living, and at different points through your life as well. I'm a very much a story girl. I love reading. I've been brought up in that sort of love of stories, power of stories. So it really struck me straight away. It's based primarily on the work of Clandon and Connolly, two eminent researchers in the field of narrative inquiry. And it's about that, how do we actually understand experience? And then when I started to think about it as a head teacher, I was like, my gosh, our schools are full of storied landscape. Surely that's at what is the heart of education. And also we have so many adults in our school that bring their own lived experiences. And how much time do we actually spend getting to know them beyond, you know, names, family, pet names, all of those type of things? How much do we actually understand what our teachers have experienced? When I say teachers, just for context, I also absolutely mean teaching assistants. It's a phrase I just use in my school to capture everybody that works in our school. But primarily my research did focus on the lived experiences of teachers. And it's about how everybody operates in those different social contexts, but we all come under one organisation. So for me, narrative inquiry not only provided that opportunity of story and meaning making through story, but it also gave me a methodology that was really robust in understanding people, and particularly that social constructivist view of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much of that resonates. Like, as you're sharing that, I was thinking a lot about nuance and how story brings that nuance and that depth and that kind of that personal element. If you're thinking about staff members being seen, heard, and valued, like how deep do we go into that understanding of who they are and where they've come from? I just want to link that a little bit to Hal Roberts' work, who looks at using Mantle of the Expert, which is drama linked with story, to buy botheredness. And I experienced his way of developing inquiry in a conference. It wasn't a conference, a gathering in Exeter. There was like a lot of the people who are part of International Thinking Worldwide. It's Ian Gilbert's kind of company, all like really quality thinkers and speakers. But in Hal's session, he kind of helped us to embody story through the way he developed storytelling. And the way it developed empathy and connection, it got us. I'll just describe a little bit of what he did, and it's just, very resource light. But he was getting us to pretend like, let's say we're in a forest, and we kind of started to create like this forest as our own, and then we had post-it notes to name all the trees so that we really felt part of it. And then he did it through the lens of like of a fairy tale, and he was saying there's a big bad wolf coming into the forest, and I want you to talk to the person next to you and gossip about the big bad wolf. So we all did it because, you know, we're good students, and like did what he asked. And then he just went like this, and he was like, he said the big bad wolf heard what you said. And like I was so gutted. So emotionally invested and gutted. Then we went for coffee, and when we came back in, he said, what would you like to say to the wolf? Like, if the wolf were here, what would you say? And one person said, I'm so sorry, wolf. What's your story? And I was just like, oh my God, if that's not empathy in action, like what if we could ask each other more, what's your story? And that's the development of connection instead of division, like empathy, understanding, curiosity. And doesn't our world need more of all of that?
Absolutely.
And that comes through narrative and story and curiosity about people's experiences, which is what you're describing. So tell us some of your key findings in the process of doing this.
Yeah, so it was fascinating. So as you know, Becky, I'm an inquiry girl at heart as well. So very much this idea of narrative inquiry. If you've got the narrative being the story, and then the inquiry being, let's make some mess. Let's go and make it really, really difficult. I always try and make all my jobs the most difficult I can, I think. But so I really adopted this inquiry mindset of, let's explore these narratives. Let's explore this sense of these teachers being in the midst. And for us in Wales as well, it was very contextually based, as in we were in the midst of going through a mass system-wide education reform since 2015. So all of the participants had experienced that. And then we were in the phase of curriculum realisation. So when you're talking about in the midst, there's all that sort of policy angle built in as well. And what I realised straight away was it's messy. Understanding lives is really messy. So instead of trying to put that in a box, I really try to exemplify that messiness. So there's lots of circles, lots of arrows going on in my findings, and lots of linking to other things. And I used Braun and Clark's reflexive thematic analysis, which actually isn't something that narrative inquirers tend to use as a way of understanding what they call their data set. But I really liked Braun and Clark's work because it allowed that understanding of puzzle pieces coming together, and they describe research as a research adventure. And I really felt that was something that aligned with that inquiry mindset as well. So the first thing, after I gathered all of the story information and started to really look at it through the lenses of organisational culture, collaboration and teacher wellbeing, 3 themes were just really standing out as strong themes that had come through the study. The first one was sense of self, and actually what does that mean, and valuing your own self, prioritizing self-reflection, understanding self in terms of previous life events as well. And not, I've got a real thing, and I might come back to this, but I've got a real thing about personal and professional lives and work-life balance. I just don't believe it's a thing. I think that you bring yourself to your job, and past school experiences, those interactions between self and others. The second theme was the impact of leaders and how leaders really set the tone. And to echo a phrase from Andy Hargreaves, organisations flourish or flounder from the head down, and the head teacher really sets that tone for culture and the way that an organisation is experienced by anybody within it, but also that complexity of being a school leader and all those decisions that you've got to make and how you're making it from that, or hopefully from that relational perspective. And also then a feeling of belonging and the importance of connection and reciprocal relationships. So obviously I didn't just leave it there. I had these 3 themes, and I worked through these 3 themes, and it was a very recursive process of having to go back to the data sets, because not only did I have the narrative conversations that I had with 8 participants, so I had like masses and masses of scripts and going back through everything and subheadings and all these things going on, but I also had documentary analysis of professional learning diaries that the participants kept, and looking at school improvement plan for the 2 schools as well. So I had this massive data that I sort of put together. And in the end, one of the sort of findings, the 3 findings that came out were the centrality of a thriving self. What does it actually mean to place yourself into being a teacher and into the workplace? The interrelated complexity of teacher wellbeing and what that means, and leading organisation and collaborative cultures and that sense of leading. But as I said earlier, everything based within then time and place. So that contextual factor of being in Wales at that significant point of curriculum realisation as well.
Oh my goodness, Kat, there's so much there. I don't even know where to start. I was thinking a little bit about Mark Finnis talks about modeling the model. And I was just thinking about how much you are kind of living and breathing just from the very beginning. You know, inquiry's messy, learning's messy, and I'm just going to be messy. And that's just part of it. So just living and breathing that in terms of your research on where you're going. But then the kind of 3 layers that you were talking about. So the professional, personal, bringing your whole self to work, the leaders being the ones who set that culture. There's so many things I want to come back to, and that's creating that sense of belonging, and then the kind of like collaborative systems to embed that kind of professional and personal. Can you talk a bit more about how you kind of see that as not like it? That's another divisionary thing, isn't it? This is my professional life. This is my personal life. This is work. This is home. So how do you see that instead as a kind of like a blended kind of balanced togetherness rather than separating those things?
Yeah, I think it was something that I've gone through, particularly through my career, but also was echoed by the participants. So I'll talk sort of from my own perspective initially, and then share some examples from participants as well. I think from my own perspective, I mean, I've been a teacher now for 23, I'm in my 24th year of being a teacher. And I think at the beginning, I was very much that this is me in school, this is me at home. And I soon realised probably quite early in my career as a deputy head teacher that I couldn't almost keep it up. I couldn't keep up this me in school, me at home. And then I got to the bottom of it, and I wasn't actually being me in school. I was being a version that I thought was expected of me. And I think I'd gone into deputy headship very young. I was only in my 4th year of teaching when I became a deputy head. And I think that brought with it a lot of pressure and a lot of way of being. At the time as well, we were very much in that accountability framework in education in Wales, with competition and being pitted against each other. So we had this drive to want to be the best, and this you almost had to paint that face on in a way, because you had to get on this bus of we're going to be excellent and let's all go together. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having that drive for excellence, but I still absolutely have that. But I'd like to think the way I conduct myself now as a head teacher is very much more relationally focused, and it is more about really looking at my own values first and making sure that my values are who I am, not just Kat as the head teacher. This is whether I'm a mum, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, whoever I am me. And I think I've gone through, and this is about my own lived experience as well. You know, when you go through things in life, they do impact upon you in school. And yes, it doesn't mean I go into the office or into school and I bear all and I tell everyone everything that's going on. But it's just about being yourself. And it's the strangest thing as well around what I wear. So I used to have a work wardrobe and a school and an outside of work wardrobe. Now I just wear clothes I feel really comfortable in. So I feel like wearing jeans to school. I got jeans on today. It's absolutely fine, you know, and it's almost like blurring those lines and it not being, like you said, this division of me in one place, me in another. And I probably didn't realize it at the time, but going through this research has really made me have a deeper understanding of myself and how I've actually got more, I suppose, those dynamic processes now in terms of being able to be the head teacher, but also bring me as a mum into the workplace, because that's really, really important. And when I'm outside of school, to be able to talk about what I'm learning, because that's also really important, and not have these divisions. And I think what really came through also with the participants was that their upbringing, their decision to become a teacher, the people that supported them in becoming a teacher, those that haven't supported them in becoming a teacher, all of those things have impacted on how they live their life as a teacher. today. So you can't ignore that. And I think the stories really demonstrated deliberate use of their values, their purpose, their identity, looking at their emotional well-being, and how much that comes from who they are as individuals, as well as how they take responsibility for themselves as well. And I think that does come with some caution, and I'm saying this, I've got over 50 staff in school as a head teacher, and you can't be one person, to all of those people if they're going through different things in their life, but actually it's about those relational contexts that you set first and foremost. So I think that idea of a thriving self really comes back to those contexts that are in school and links to that, creating the conditions to thrive. What are those things we're able to put in place to support all of our staff thrive, regardless of what they're going through? And there is a limit, obviously, I go through days where I'm running a business head on, and then there's another day when it's like, oh, actually there's life going on. There's really tricky balance. But I think the more we celebrate teachers for who they are as individuals and don't try and put them in these boxes, the better our education profession will be.
Oh, yes, all of that. And I was thinking, as you were kind of sharing that, this kind of idea of what's the cost if we do, what's the cost if we don't. And just interestingly, one of your team brought up in Masterminds as their hot seat, they were asking about masking, and how to support children to understand what masking is and how not to mask and how to connect to their true selves. And there's so much in our upbringing, our schooling, our society, social media, that encourages us to put a mask on and project a certain image out into the world. And ultimately, that's not healthy. That hasn't been serving us. That then creates this, like everyone loves me if I'm this, but what about if they knew about all the messy bits too? And it kind of encourages that whole person, that, everything that is wonderful and amazing and all of the things that have happened in my life to get me to this point, and just taking all of that into consideration. There's a line that's coming to me that actually my husband heard at a retreat. All of you is welcome here. Can we create conditions where we feel all of us is welcome here? Not just like the good projected polished bits, so that's kind of what lands with me in terms of what you're describing.
I think that's really important, Becky. And I think I can count numerous occasions where I've met people in my role as a head teacher, and they've almost looked me up and down and went, "You're the head teacher," or "You look too young to be a head teacher." And I was just good makeup. That really is all it is. But and you think, what does a head teacher look like then? I'm really intrigued. Tell me, what does a head teacher look like? And is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I haven't got a suit on? Like, what is a head teacher? What does a head teacher look like? And I just find it fascinating that is even a comment that somebody that may, and I still get it now. It's not, this was years ago. I still get that now. And I think, wow, what's the society we created if we think a head teacher should look in a certain way?
Yeah, just by existing, you're breaking down like mindsets and prejudices. Like, yeah, that is fascinating. And just as well, like, I'm just wondering as well, just within that kind of mind of, okay, so we, because lots of places where I've taught, there's like some places I've taught, there's been that kind of show up as your authentic whole self. And some places I've taught, it's like, and this is what it looks to be professional. But of course we want to be a professional, but then it's like a polished image. It's like not fully myself. And then, what does that teach to the kids as well? What kind of model is that to our young people and families? And, so, and kids pick up on that. They pick up on all of the subtleties and the nuances. Yeah. So I don't know whether just on that kind of strand, in your research, what did you find around that kind of, the difference between, what difference did it make to fully know kind of teachers and their backgrounds and everything they brought to work? What difference does that make?
Honestly, it makes so difference. I mean, on the theme of professionalism, we've got a professional commitment in our school that the teachers and teaching assistants wrote, I didn't write. And actually on there, it talks about taking risks, having an inquiring mindset, be messy, exactly those behaviors that we want. So I just had to get that in because I'm really proud of that piece of work. But first and foremost, it was an absolute honour to listen to the lived experiences of teachers. And I think my naivety as an early researcher was I don't really know what I was expecting, first of all. So when I started collecting that data, we had what I call narrative conversations. They weren't interviews. And first and foremost, that was really important, that I just went in with prompts, and they started with tell me. So tell me why you're a teacher. Tell me about your life in X school. Tell me what it feels like to collaborate in your school. And so they were very, very open. And at first I thought, oh gosh, they're not going to talk to me. And particularly because some of the participants knew me because they were from my own school, and some of the participants didn't know me because they were from a school that I'm not the head teacher of. And I thought, oh, then the particular ones who don't know me, they're not going to say anything. And they just did. They just opened up and they shared, and it was just an absolute privilege to be able to hear the life stories of people. And, what do you like watching on Netflix? You like watching those things that are like real life and, finding out about people's lives, or documentary. It was almost like this real life documentary of teachers and all those nuances of their life. And every single participant had something different in their life that I was like, wow. And even the ones that were in my own school, like I didn't know before. And I think from my own perspective as a head teacher, taking that time to get to know my own staff was so much more beneficial, because I'm able now to make decisions much more relationally focused and much more about those individuals that are within my school and are living and breathing and being in my school every single day. We actually use that methodology wider across the school as well. So we had school improvement partners that came in and undertook narrative conversations with wider staff members as well, so that we had different audiences coming in and just being like, tell me, what's it like to be a teacher in this school? And how often have we actually opened up and asked those questions? But at the same time, it's okay to ask the questions, but you've got to be prepared for the answers. And I did hear things from my own staff of things that maybe I was a bit surprised at, or a bit like, oh, I didn't mean it to go like that, or that wasn't my intention. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to really think about what I do about this now, and there were some challenging points and one of them was about, when you come to my school, first of all, it can feel really overwhelming because the school feels so different and acts so differently. And am I actually supporting staff when they first come in? And that's something I've had to really reflect on as the head teacher, alongside the leadership team, and saying, what are we actually doing when our staff first arrive? And there is an element of professionalism where you've got a job in this school, you've got to get on board with our philosophy and our vision and our values. But what are we also doing as leaders? What conditions are we putting in place to be able to support staff when they join us, so that they're able to have that thorough understanding of what we expect within our school? So I think hearing those stories really made me think about not only who they are, but also that emotion that comes with the job, and thinking about ways that we can protect that. I think one of the outcomes of the study was really looking at something called reflective practice. I work with a team based in an Iron Bevan Health Board. I think some of them probably watching today, the Cynefin team. So it's a team of educational and clinical psychologists, and they're doing some incredible work around reflective space, particularly for school leaders. But I think as well, that should be something that's available for teachers, giving them that chance to have a conversation with people that are not maybe directly related in school, but have that opportunity to talk and to offload and to just talk through things on that emotional level, because teaching is an emotional job. It's we have to bring our all into it, but there's got to be those points for an outlet as well. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned through the study.
You were breaking up a tiny bit for me at the end there. I don't know whether people on the call caught some of that, so I was just trying to catch the end of that. But like that sense of having your whole self valued, and having that valued by your leadership and everyone within the school. There's a couple of things I'm thinking of that, like, I always think all children want to feel seen, heard, and valued. And that's exactly the same for all adults. All adults want to feel seen, heard, and valued. And there's a couple of things, like, alongside that I was thinking of. One of the questions you had about tell me about. That's a really great coaching question. It's in the book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier, I think that's his name. But tell me more is one of his coaching questions. And just saying that in conversation with anyone, I mean, you're showing curiosity, and people love to open up about that stuff. So just threading that in. And one more element I wanted to bring into that, in terms of, I mean, Kat, my kind of passion around self-growth and therapy and work on self being the first thing we do before we build relational practice or develop our own leadership or practice. But one thing I've been reflecting on in terms of that being seen, heard, or valued is that it is in terms of our own self-work. We're all bringing our own inner children to work, so depending on how much healing work people have done on themselves, they may be aware of that or not. But I've been reflecting on, do our inner children feel safe at work? And we do that through showing curiosity and showing that level of care, where you create emotional and psychological safety, which is safe for children, safe for adults, and safe for adults' inner children. So therefore, schools can actually be places of healing, not places of damage, which is what can happen quite a lot. So I'm wondering, in your kind of narrative inquiry, did teachers share some of those more traumatic experiences from being in the profession, sadly?
Yeah, they did. And I think, when you look at narrative inquiry and the sort of the time element of that, they talk a lot about, through narrative inquiry, how you've got the past, present, and the future, and how the lived experiences can impact all those. And one of the things I was really struck by through the talking to participants and listening to their stories was where previous experiences in the workplace, and there's research that talks about being like toxic cultures, toxic school cultures and things like that, how that's still impacted, even though they weren't in that place any longer, there's still that long lasting impact. And first of all, that just makes me so sad, because there's no need. We're all human. And I think that, having places that are toxic, you go back to, it's the leadership team and leaders that run those organizations, because the schools flourish or flounder from the head down. And that, that is something that I really believe in. And I just think that is so sad that there are so many within our profession that are feeling like that. But what really struck me, and I think this was something I probably wasn't expecting as much, was even though they were out of those environments, the scars were still there, and that lasting impact was still there, despite, not being in that situation any longer. And actually, it's the same with children, isn't it? When we know in terms of childhood trauma and how that can manifest and present itself a lot later on in life, it's the same thing. But I think it's so overlooked. And I think this whole idea of self is something within our profession that you go through teacher training, you're taught how to be a really good teacher, you're taught to reflect on your lessons, but actually reflecting on self is not something that I hear within teacher training. It's not something I hear across the profession. And that whole interrelationship between personal and professional identity is manifest through that understanding of self. And I think we have to do more as school leaders to provide the conditions for people to feel safe, that they are able to talk about how they're feeling. And it's about us really understanding how life events can alter people. And another key theme through the study was the impact of motherhood, and how, we know majority of teaching workforce are women. And actually, it's okay for people to change when they've had babies and come back to the workplace. That's very normal. But we almost try and just keep people in these boxes. And then we go even further in education, in primary school, of, you're a we call them a downstairs teacher and upstairs teacher. So we've got our lower age groups downstairs and our upper juniors, upper key stage 2, for want of a better word, upstairs. And you constantly put people into boxes. And we sort of retract all of that and say, we're all here for all children. You might be a great early years practitioner, but one day you could be teaching in year 6, and that's absolutely fine. And we try and sort of break down that professional identity so people are bringing their true self into the work. But going back to that idea of toxic workplace cultures and past experiences, it's that lasting impact of that I was really shocked by and really struck by. And phrases that were used by participants that are in the study that I've quoted are things like, people are saying that we were in the trenches, likening it to being at war. Like, what's going on? Why are our staff and our colleagues feeling like this? And it's so sad. And there's an element within the research that I talk about national policy as well, and how this isn't just the role of leaders to understand and support teachers, it has to be a system-wide change as well.
Language is so important, isn't it? Like, just you sharing there about being in the trenches, and I think, like you said, that's a shared accountability thing, and it takes awareness. So I remember, I'm going to say like 15 years ago or so, I was meeting up with a couple of head teachers in Bristol, just down the road from me. And we were gathering I can't remember what we were doing, some kind of revolutionary education thing, Kat. I don't quite know what it was. But I remember her asking me what I did and where I was working. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm just a teacher. And she was like, don't ever say you're just a teacher. And I was like, oh, yeah, like, I don't like, why did I even say that? Of course, it's like I value my profession, but I also realize, you know, in the press, teaching's been pushed down and been devalued, you know, so it's all of that kind of wider picture that then leads us to kind of parrot what's been told to us. You know, but really interestingly, having taught internationally, that is not the vibe internationally. You know, the school I worked in Bangkok, the parents couldn't have valued us more. They were just like, we're in collaboration with you. What can we learn with you? How can we figure this out together? So I guess as well, a little bit of, I would guess what you're doing in your school and off the base of your research is rewriting the narrative around education and teachers and teacher-parent collaboration as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think more so around teaching assistants, because I think they're very much the forgotten part of our workforce. And, you know, they're as important as teachers, but our school could not function without our teaching assistants. So one of the things we did right from the day one when we opened was pay our teaching assistants to stay for professional learning every week and to join us on our professional learning days, our inset days. And that's still not commonplace, you know, across the area in which my school is situated. And it's something that I just think, wow. So you've got teaching assistants that come in and are expected to work alongside children and teachers, but they're coming in with the children and they're leaving with the children. When's that time for professional dialogue? When's that time for reflection? When's that time of feeling part of the school community? And I know there's a huge piece of work in Wales at the moment around teaching assistants and really making sure that they are valued and they're, you know, paid appropriately and all of those things. And I think, again, that's something that really shone through in the research, was just that value of feeling part of a school community that doesn't have those ranks almost, you know. Yeah, everyone's got a job, everyone's got their role to play within a school, and we're very aware of who's what level and who does what job. You know, I'm the head teacher, but it doesn't mean that I'm any different as a human to anybody else. And I think that's the key. So, you know, we're not just a teacher and we're not just a teaching assistant. We're all human and we all come together within our team. I can see that Becky has dipped out, so I'm going to keep talking because she warned me this might happen. I think another key part of the research as well talked around collaboration. So sort of adding on from what I was just saying, collaboration has been so important for the research and was an output of the research. And collaboration in many forms. And I think I started off the research really thinking about collaboration being something you do in professional learning, something that is working alongside each other and just having conversations with each other. But actually, collaboration has proven to be something that is absolutely integral to well-being, and something that has been something that we've needed when it comes to curriculum realisation based on our reform processes. So we talk a lot in our school around collaborative professionalism and the work of Andy Hargreaves, and how you have to look at collaboration as a system-wide change. And I think that's something that has really helped with the work that we're doing in the school. So what comes with collaboration is a sense of being a learning organisation, and for us as a school that we would call ourselves a learning organisation. And through the research I could prove that both my school and the other school are learning organisations. They add to the knowledge base across Wales. They absolutely prioritise collaborative practice across the school community. So not just something that happens in a staff meeting or in a professional learning session, but something that happens across the board. And all the participants in the study talked about how being part of a team and collaborating, and that collaboration being part of culture, actually was essential to their well-being. They talked about things having a reduction in their workload, an increase in their positivity and enjoyment in going to work, knowing they were going to work alongside each other. And also that collaboration then extended when they were able to work alongside professionals in other schools. And I think part of that idea of creating the conditions to thrive talks about how we can create those opportunities for collaboration within our schools. What comes alongside that as well was the freedom that teachers had to make their own decisions. So all the participants talked about the freedom in which they were able to make decisions that they sort of had the most impact on. So we talk in Wales of the phrase subsidiarity, and almost giving that power and autonomy over to teachers and teaching assistants so they're able to make those key decisions wherever they are in their workplace. So participants talked a lot about that. Obviously, all of that can only happen if you've got transformational leaders that can set that tone for organisational culture. So one of the big things that came through was around how the leaders set the tone for those schools to be able to enact and be in that way, but also how they would have that ongoing nurture and reflection and shaping of collaborative school culture. And within those collaborative school cultures, trust, agency and belonging were really prioritised. And I think that's something that we all need to consider and really focus on as school leaders, if you are school leaders. I found that really strange. So as a head teacher researcher, it was really strange to hear that, because I was really grappling with my own sense of they're talking about me and who am I? But it was something we had to keep working through. Becky, I've just kept going. So just so you to know, I've started talking about collaboration, and the other bit of a theme that came through in my research, and really about just what I found in the research was that collaboration, I went in thinking collaboration was a thing you do in terms of professional learning and behaviour in a staff meeting and that type of thing. And actually what has come out of it is collaboration is culture, and it's actually a process and a way of being, not just something that you do. And that again goes back to that pivotal role of leaders shaping the organisation to enable that to happen. And that can only happen through prioritising trust, agency and belonging.
Brilliant. I'm so sorry I cut out and I missed out on the middle bit in between, but I can pick up from there because collaboration is one of my favourite subjects for sure. And just on that bit that you were sharing there, Kat, it's making me think about embodying our values and living and breathing those values. So if we value collaboration, we can do lip service to that. We can set up collaborative systems, but really we need to really know how that feels as a lived value and what true deep collaboration looks, sounds and feels like. And I know just beyond your research with what you're doing in Jubilee Park, you're really looking at developing that language for learning. And to have a strong collaborative culture, you need to have the language and the systems that go with that. So would love to hear more about your research looking at that, how to build that collaborative culture, and to truly live and breathe collaboration, and how that looks in Jubilee Park too.
Yeah, I think in terms of that, again, it's about how you lead that as a collaborative culture. So it absolutely has to start with the visions and values of the school leader, but also those vision principles you put in place for the school. So another one of our vision principles is igniting a passion for learning. That drives everything that we do within our school. So we have to be learners. I think, again, one of the proudest moments I've got is when I went back after passing my Viva and going into school and sharing with the children, I've done it. I'm a doctor, and then they're saying things like, so are you going to make us feel better? Like, no, not that one, not that type of doctor. But even just explaining that to children in Newport, that you can be a doctor at other things, and I think embodying learning as the head teacher is something that I will continue to do. But one of the big things that came through around collaboration and the experience of collaboration was how it was experienced emotionally. And again, I think that's the bit that people forget, that you can put those structures and systems in place. You can provide opportunities to work together, and so collaboration in its simplest sense, meaning working together, but actually it's much, much more complicated than that. It's about earned autonomy, it's about trust, but it's about how do you experience that emotionally. So you need to be thinking about that idea of collaborative professionalism, how as leaders that you're individuals, so who will work well together and who won't work well together, and that's okay, because we're all human. We don't all have to get on with each other and be best friends with everybody. So it's like knowing your people, knowing who will be best to bring about that change, if it's change that you want, or some work that you want to do, and then that will always sit well with people if you give that reason why. And I think that goes right back, and my mantra, Becky, of everything has to start with a why, and that why needs to be shared. So when we're talking about that idea of relational connectedness, relational collaboration, we will always start by saying, this is why we're doing this, and this is what I want to see as a result. that's known because it will always align back to our school improvement priorities or our vision principles. So there's no mixed messages. There's no random, oh, she's talking about something that's like way over there and actually nothing to do with our school. Neither do we have anything that's brought in sort of top down from external people. So if we're told to do something by local authority or Welsh Government, my first question is it statutory? If it's not statutory, does it align with my vision principles? If it doesn't align with my vision principles and it's not statutory, we're not doing it, because actually it won't sit right with me and my organisation. And I've come across, some challenge around that over the years, but I've held my ground because I'm the head teacher of the school. I know the school context really, really well, and I know the people that work in that context really, really well. So I know what's best for the children. And again, what's best for the children, what's best for the staff will not sit well with every single individual. But as long as I can go in with those right intentions, I feel happy and I can sleep at night. I'm not going to make everybody happy every minute of every day, but I'm always doing it from a relational focus and with my values, being infused in it. So I know it's right in my heart, I suppose, is the way to answer that. In terms of what that looks like in our school, we've got lots of examples of collaboration, but I think one of my biggest examples that's had the most impact has been something called our collaborative approach to improve in practice, our CAPE model. We're in our 4th year of our CAPE model, and it's actually something that all the participants from my school commented on as something that supported their well-being and has supported them to thrive within my research. So it's a lovely link to the research as well as being a reality in my school. So about 4 or 5 years ago, myself and my deputy head were sat talking about all the collaborative stuff that we had going on in the school, and that we really feel we're a learning organisation. We got collaboration at the heart of everything that we do, but there was a but. And the but was we were still going in as school leaders and observing our teachers every term do their little showcase, woohoo, that's so great we are for half an hour or an hour, because we had to do it. So I went back through the statutory guidance. I was like, this doesn't actually say that we have to go in for X amount of time to actually go in like this and, top down, tell teachers what to do. So I was like, there's got to be a better way. There has to be something that works better. So we engaged in lots of research. We started to think about some ideas that we'd seen in New Zealand and Australia and Canada, and there's got to be other ways of working. And we were heavily influenced by some early work in Ontario around collaborative structures that they had done as a state. So we decided actually who will know best? The leadership team and the teachers will know best. They're the ones that are in practice day in, day out. Now, I haven't taught in a classroom now for, I've got to add all this up, probably about 13 years, because I was a non-teaching deputy for some of my deputy headship, and I don't teach as a head. So although I really know good teaching and learning and I know good pedagogy, I'm not doing that job day in, day out that my teachers are doing. And I don't profess to either. And I think that goes right back to that relational safety. I would happily stand up and say, I don't do what you do. So you've got to tell me what it's like, because I can waltz in and out, and I'm in classes every day. I spent the morning this morning going around the school, but I'm not actually living and breathing and doing your job. I need you to tell me your story so I understand it. So we set about, I set about providing the leadership team with a challenge, and I actually left the room, and I was a bit of a control freak in the early days of our school being built. So it was a bit of a moment when I went, I'm not even going to stay in here for these decisions. And the leadership team, I think, all thought I bugged the space they were in and I was secretly listening, but I really wasn't. So they devised a model, which we took to our teaching team and we piloted for the first year, took feedback, and, and every year we've refined the process. But in essence, the CAPE process is that we have teaching teams across the school. So they're also our performance development review teams or professional development review teams. So it's all based on pedagogy and practice. They meet 3 times a year. So in the autumn term, they'll get together. It's based around the spiral of inquiry model. So Judy and Linda's spiral of inquiry frame all of the CAPE process. So they start off with having this niggle and having a hunch of something that's not quite right within their classroom. They have that towards the end of September, October. So they come in real live in with, these children have come together into my class. We've got split classes through the year. So every year the makeup of children will be different. So always different combinations of children will always show up something that we haven't expected, or some new children coming in and joined us. So the teacher will come straight away from that mindset of, I don't have to be the font of all knowledge. I don't know everything. about X, Y, and Z. Help me as a team. So we're coming in from that perspective straight away. They'll share their niggles, they'll share their hunches, those things that are not quite sitting right. And then they'll set about, some ideas and some mind mapping of ways to overcome those. Then they all observe each other. So this is where the real power lies. So there's a leader in each team. They'll go and look at each other's practice, and they'll do collective feedback. And I think one of the real strengths early on, I always remember one of the teachers, he was an NQT at the time, and he was in the same group as my deputy head. And you had an NQT who had been teaching for 5 weeks, giving feedback to the deputy head that had been teaching for 22 years. And that is so powerful when it comes to power and those power dynamics, And at first he was very much like, I didn't know what to say, or I couldn't say anything bad, And it's like, it's not like choosing something good or bad. Just what did you see? Tell us what you saw. And then as that process has evolved, people have become so used to talking about practice that it's not you did this and it's wrong. It's, I noticed, I'm curious about, I'm wondering, really modeling the language that you use all the time, Becky, in Learning Pioneers. And that becomes then that language of learning across our school for our adults as well. And, we're setting up that context of, we're not there, having the answers of everything, but we're really coming in with that inquiring mindset. And that whole process of collaboration has literally just gone from strength to strength. And we've been able to look at themes across the school. So we had the 1 year we looked at play, because we had a big focus on play in terms of our school improvement. So that was the focus for our CAPE. This year we're looking at our language of learning and how we're using Learnish in the classroom. The weird bit is it's one of the most successful things in the school, and I'm not actually directly involved in it, which I hate sometimes. And I feel like I'm real FOMO, it's CAPE week, and myself and Sarah, my deputy, are like, we're not allowed in the classroom. They're all doing that. We're not part of that because we're not in practice anymore. But again, that just shows that power of collaboration. When you build it together and you get it right, it sets the tone for that climate of trust. And it also has a huge, huge impact on teacher well-being.
Yeah, I can see it's all interrelated. And I was thinking right at the beginning when you were beginning to describe what you were doing, I was thinking about that process of building trust and those things, the learning moves and the leadership moves that leadership can make that erode trust and that build trust, and kind of from a teacher's perspective, I've taught in quite a few different schools. And there are so many things I witnessed and observed or happened to me that I was like, now I don't trust you. How can I trust what's happening now? And once that trust is eroded, unless it's really acknowledged and changed, it's really hard to get back. So I was kind of thinking about your process of starting with why and being really transparent about that and bringing people along with you. As you do that, I would imagine trust is built and built and built. So when it comes to a point when you're saying this is the direction we're going in, your whole team trusts you because you've repeatedly proven with them that what you're putting into action works. And you also have that boundary of like, we're not going to do that. That's not right for us now. And I just think that is so key, to just be very, very clear. You were saying before about being a yes and a no for something. But I actually think knowing your yeses and nos are really important for your own personal boundaries and for like whole school, leadership boundaries too. And having that really clear is actually what creates that safety and trust, because your team will know that you're not going to go down a sudden random rabbit hole that's going to require them to work 14 hours a day and at the weekends and not have that much impact. They just know you're not going to do that. So you've got it within this kind of framework. And the other thing I was thinking about was about breaking down this hierarchical system that is so often built into schools, and the really negative effects that can have on teacher agency and well-being and so many things. As soon as you've got someone in like a middle management position who doesn't really love their job, but kind of enjoys the power, and hasn't done their self-work and doesn't like to self-reflect, you've got a real problem. That can be really problematic, and it can be problematic anywhere. But when you break down those barriers and create that collaborative, we're all in this together, we all have something to offer, let's figure it out together, let's all give each other feedback. What you've embedded into that system is vulnerability and coming back to the kind of showing up as in work as your whole self, authenticity. So it's those two things together. And I know you're a fan of Brené Brown, so she talks a lot about authenticity.
I think just to say, as a school leader, that's really hard to do as well. I think it's quite easy to go in and just tell people what to do. And no, it's my, I'm the head, I've told you. Showing up, being vulnerable, being consistent with your messaging, high levels of communication. It's really hard because you've got to work at it constantly. You can never ever sit back and just take it for granted, and you can never be complacent, And I think our school has been open, we're in our 9th year now, so it's actually probably harder now more than ever, because there is that sense of people. We haven't had many new staff for about 2 years now, so everyone knows what they're doing. So in one hand, it's just like a ship for smooth sailing. Everyone knows what they're doing and their part they play. But that's where complacency can really quickly kick in. So we've always got to have our eye on that. And then that takes time. So you've got to invest that time into people. You've got to keep working on trust. You can't just say, well, you know me, you know what I'm like. I've got to keep proving myself in that way. And I've got to keep showing up, and I've got to keep, and sometimes that it can get wearing. And I think that's where you have to have that understanding of yourself. It's almost going full circle to where we started the conversation, that I know there are times then when I've just got to take myself away from a situation, or I work from home, and I used to sit with so much regret. And again, this sounds ridiculous saying it out loud, but sit with regret if I'm working from home. Like, why can't I? I'm a grown up. I'm a 45-year-old woman. Surely I'm allowed to work at home. But it's to sit with, like, what will people think about me? And now I'm like, I need it sometimes, because you have to be so present in this way of working. Sometimes you just need that time of stepping away and stepping back and switching off. And I think, part of my self-learning, particularly through my research, was understanding those moments where I just need to be, and I need to slow down myself, because that then makes me more effective as a school leader.
And that again is breaking down societal conditioning around that. I know one of your values is slowliness, but we have not been taught to do that. We've been conditioned to go, 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 push, 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 hustle, hustle, hustle. And that is what creates burnout. So it's actually an act of rebellion to stand back and go, do you know what? Actually, to be my very best self and to be the most present and productive I can be, me being at home right now is exactly the right thing that's needed. And that's where the guilt comes from. It's the conditioning of, we've been told that more is more, but actually less is more. And the intentionality of what that less looks like is more and has more of an impact. And it means that we're purposeful and we're intentional, not just the first thing that comes to mind.
But I think as well, it's also having that clarity about roles, responsibilities, and whose job is it. And we had some great training from Angela O'Brien, who looked at systems leadership with us as a leadership team last summer. And one of the things that really struck all the leadership team was this notion of whose work is it and what is the work. And again, this way of working, you can fall really quickly into the trap of saying, well, we're all equal. Yes, we are, because we're all human. However, we have different roles and different responsibilities, and the work is different. So that, there could be people here watching, a teacher who's just sort of stressed to the max, thinking, well, it's all right for her. She hasn't got a class, so she can work from home on, a day, or, a day, a fortnight, or whatever. I can't. Well, no, you can't, and that's your role. So we front load that in conversations as well. So I don't hide the fact I'm working from home. It's in the school diary, so everyone knows. And I even put, and I probably don't even need to do this, but I still do. I put what I've done in there as little notes, just so people know what I'm working on, which is probably a little bit too far. But just having that is the job that I've got. That's what I'm paid to do. So that is something that's within the work that I do. If you are X and you do this within the school organisation, these are the parameters in which you work, and they may be different to how I work. However, this is just these are the way that we can work within those constraints. So I think that is so important, because I don't want it to be misconstrued that when I talk about having like a relational focused school and we create these conditions to thrive, means that everyone is treated the same. And I don't mean emotionally treated. I mean actually treated to do the job they do. There are things that are different, and that's okay. But you just got to open that conversation up. Don't hide from it, And the more you stand up and say, like, this is what I'm doing because this is my job, back to the why. You share that why all the time. It provides that safety. People know where they are, they know those limitations, they know the expectations, so they can go and do their job then as well. And I think that's a really important part of it.
Well, that comes down to that kind of a clear communication, which is another thing just none of us have been taught very well, so kind of, and I don't know whether that came out in your research in terms of what teachers were saying about their experience in schools. Did you come across anything to do with communication, or good communication, poor communication?
Yeah, I think anything that was talked about in terms of toxic culture was the fact that they just couldn't communicate when it got to a certain level of leadership, that it was very much you just do as I say, and that form of leadership being very dictatorial, and that was just the way it was. But in terms of both of the schools that were featured in the research, the key part of being able to be transformational leaders, collaborative cultures, making sense of national policy, all came back to the effective communication of leadership, and that everybody knew where they were, and there was that clarity so that they could get about their job then, knowing and having the right tools for the trade almost to do the job they needed to do. And that was massively clear. But it really sat within that whole idea of policy and how you translate policy into practice as well.
Yeah, it's so nuanced. There's so much. So I'm going to come back to some of the questions that I'd noted down before as potential holes to go down. One was to look at actionable steps leadership could take. I think we started to cover that, but we should definitely come back, because I know that people listening or really want to think and distill in terms of that intention around clarity. So we'll come back to that. I've got two other questions that I want to dip into. One is, what surprised you about your doctoral research? And the other one is, how has it changed your leadership, which has come through so clearly, but I think coming into that would be interesting. But what surprised you?
I think, first of all, what surprised me was the openness in which participants spoke, and the passion they spoke about being teachers. And I think that's something that I will always hold dear and remember. The privilege of listening to people's stories and the actual desire to want to make a difference and why they're in the profession. And a lot of the participants at the end of the conversation were like, oh, I felt like therapy. I was like, it did for me as well, and having that sense of, I remember why I'm in this job. It was a real, and I don't know why I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't. I don't know what I was expecting, but I know that really, really struck me. The other thing, and I can't believe I'm actually going to say this publicly, but I have said it publicly before, was the way that the secondary school teachers responded. Now, I'm a primary school girl. Okay, I'm a primary school girl at heart. Taught in predominantly year 1 and year 2 are my favourite years to teach, and always been in a primary school. And I had a very fixed view of secondary school teachers, and I think that's partly to do with the context in Wales and across the UK in terms of this exam factory of we've got to get the children ready and get into exams. And I had a fantastic secondary school in myself and really inspirational teachers, which is probably why I'm doing the job I'm doing now. But I think probably just through, meeting different people, I had a bit of a view of secondary school teachers that it was all about their subject, and that was the most important thing. So whether they were a history teacher, an English teacher, a physical development teacher, and they was almost in this bubble of my subject, let's get children through to get to GCSEs. And I was absolutely wrong, completely and utterly wrong, because the way in which those teachers spoke, they were exactly the same, passion and want for children's well-being and want for that rounder look of a child. And actually sometimes not particularly, they were passionate about the subject, but that wasn't the be all and end all. And I loved that really, really surprised me, because I wasn't expecting it. I just thought they would be really talking about their subject all the time. I don't know why. It was my naivety, I suppose, of secondary school. But that's something that was really, really special, and really, being able to listen to the way that they were talking. We're all the same. There was no difference between primary and secondary. And again, why are we pitted against each other? Why is this feeling that when children arrive in year 7, that the sort of the view out there is that we've got to get these children in primary. What have they done in primary? Let's get them ready now for secondary school. And but also then that primary schools, like, oh, they'll all change when they get up there and it's different. Well, why can't we start thinking together? Why can't we build this continuum of learning? And I know in Wales in particular, we've got such an opportunity to be doing that now with our new curriculum and looking at that progression of 3 to 16. And I really could feel that emerging through the study of the difference of the new curriculum. And that was the other thing that really surprised me. So there's been a lot of doom and gloom publicly about our curriculum in Wales, and there's been quite vociferous voices about it being this airy-fairy curriculum and it's not knowledge rich enough. And actually it is a beautiful blend of knowledge, skills and experience all the way through our curriculum from the age of 3 to 16. And one of the massive things that came through in the study was that the new curriculum was providing teachers with agency, with autonomy. They felt trusted to make decisions. They weren't given these schemes of work to go and deliver. They had the opportunity to make it right for the learners in front of them, both in primary and secondary school. And everyone that I talked to, and an outcome of the study was that we got it right in Wales and we're going in the right direction. And it was such a positive news story, to the extent that in my Viva, both of my supervisors really quizzed me about that, because they were all saying lots of the research, early research emerging in Wales around the new curriculum is that it's been really hard, and there's been issues around teachers understanding and their professional responsibility. And I found the opposite. And I was like, well, I'm just reporting what teachers told me, let's praise it. And actually, I did say at one point, the thing is, we all like in Wales to focus on the doom and gloom, and I'm not going to mention the rugby on Saturday, but we all like the news story that's really bad. Let's change the rhetoric. Let's be positive, because actually there are these glimmers of positivity coming through in Wales, and then let's fly the flag for that, because there's some really good stuff happening. And I think that again is something we need to just shift the rhetoric, shift the momentum. Let's be positive about what is happening.
100%. And since a lot of the focus is on narrative and story, it makes me think of the thinking routine from Project Zero: side story, main story, hidden story. And I always think with thinking routines, they're not just amazing for the classroom. We might consider using them on our news, because the news is so often the doom and gloom story. And there's so often this, as soon as there's something new or tentative, let's just squash it. What if not? What if we get, and that's another thinking routine, what if not? I love that thinking routine. But what if we gave it a chance? And what if we tapped into the things that were working and are working and amplified those up? Because that just kind of self-assuredness of telling a story that pushes down on something, that's not cool. That's just not a cool attitude. They need that tell me more coaching question.
I think we should have a new thinking frame called squash it.
Yeah, let's invent some of our own. Totally. So I love that, because you're telling a story from your research that shows something different to the story that perhaps we're being told, from another angle. So glad I asked that question. And I love what you were saying as well about that kind of divisions come up so much. So primary versus secondary, and I often think within the world as well, curricula are pitched against one another, and I often also think about collaboration across the pond, what's going on in the States and Canada and what's going on across Europe, and could there be more cross collaboration there? Because so often when I'm speaking with what would be considered lead thinkers, consultants, inspirations in the States, they've never heard of the brilliant people we've got in the UK who can provide inspiration and depth, and vice versa. And why not get all these people together, because they're amazing and they're saying brilliant things in lots of different ways, and they all offer perspective that's really powerful, as do all of the educators, leaders, parents, students. So let's all figure it out together, because there's something to learn from everything and everyone in every context.
Yeah.
Okay, so how has doing your doctoral research changed your leadership? You've kind of covered that, but tell us a bit more about that.
It's so changed me. It's really hard to put into words. And I think narrative inquiry is about lived experience, and that idea of temporality, of that time, how you change over time. So if I go back to when I started all of my doctoral study in September 2019. So my school had only been open 2 years. It had opened in the September 2019 as a full-size school because we had a growing school model. At the similar time to that, I'd gone through major life events. So, the whole personal, professional, bringing me into it. I was very much the girl that needed to do really well, and got a bit of a complex if I do things wrong or I'm not, the best. And I was actually nicknamed Hermione. I may as well just get it out there. Hermione out of our little group of students, So I am Hermione Granger. And I think the first thing that struck me was how bad I am at getting any form of response and feedback. So I'd get you'd start writing essays, and I hadn't written essays since my undergrad or PGCE. So I did an undergrad psychology degree and then a PGCE. So that was in 2001. So it was a long time that I'd written anything apart from, blogs and that type of thing. So all of a sudden I was getting feedback and being told they weren't good enough and that I needed to get better. And I was like, oh, well, sorry, I'm surely I'm good enough. And I had to have this real change of mindset of, no, this is good. What do I say to the children? Feedback's great. It helps you get a better learner. I couldn't cope with that, at least probably for the first couple of years of this, going through the process of all of that. Obviously then 2020 hit and it was COVID. So I had to manage being a single mum, run a school, lockdown, and still be a student. So I learned an awful lot about myself and the way that I'm able to almost compartmentalize some of the work that I have to do, and that I'm really good in terms of managing my time effectively so that I could dedicate time for study whilst trying to run the school and whilst trying to do everything else. So that massively taught me. But above all else, I think what I've learned about myself is that you have to bring, as I keep saying, you bring yourself into this job. The more you do that, the more you understand that you're nowhere near a finished article and never will be. Now, I've had lots of success as a head teacher. I've had lots of success with my school, but I'm still really grounded in there's so much more we can do and there's so much more we can learn. And the only way we can learn is through collaborating with others and have that outward look. And that's why I came looking for something that, I needed that professional learning from elsewhere, which is where I found Learning Pioneers and had that connection with you. And again, that's really grown myself as a professional and myself as a person. So through the study, I've been able to rethink about myself and how those deeply human processes change over time. And that's good. I think sometimes I could have been in a real mindset of this is the way I am. I'm not, it's just who I am and I'm not changing. But I've really learned that flexibility and adapting to different situations. I am so much more curious as a learner, and actually that it's okay to not know things. I really felt that as a head teacher, particularly early on as a head teacher, that I should have all the answers and I should know everything. And the moment I voiced, I don't know, actually, I don't know, you get on that spot question, you get asked and I say, I don't know. And that's all right to say that. The more you own that and you say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. I can find out. Or if I can't find out, I'll know somebody who will know. Rather than trying to keep all these plates spinning and be the best of everything, there was almost this relief, and that I could just, again, be me and I could be myself. And I feel like I've had a real change over particularly the last 3 or 4 years of coming back to me, Catherine Place. This is who I am. And, I'm happy with who I am, and some people will like it, some people won't. That's absolutely fine by me. I do everything with that right intention, and I think that going through that process of a doctoral thesis really, really makes you understand yourself and all the flaws that come with it, but it actually teaches you to embrace those flaws, and that's something that I hope, I will continue to do, and something I'm really proud of actually sharing with my daughter as well. She's 14 now, so she's lived and breathed Jubilee Park growing and being built, and also her mum being a student, and her words of advice, you'll love this, Becky, her words of advice at the morning of my 5 were, don't fumble, stay humble. Like, thank you, darling.
That's so perfect. I love it. What a rule for life. And yes, thank you so much for sharing that story, because it makes the kind of that process of, and in you describing that all of that is professional and personal growth interwoven. It's all of that together. So describing that process of kind of how you kind of got to that, and how you Guy talks a lot about professional humility, that state of personal and professional humility, where you're vulnerable, you're curious, you don't know everything, but you're figuring out together, and you're having those intentional systems and kind of leadership moves in place. That's a process. So I hope that any leader kind of listening to that can relate to any point of that process. And it begins with is, like you said, oh, you know what? I don't know. And realizing that as soon as you say that, the world doesn't fall apart, and just that we're all, like you were talking about, kind of messiness, our lives, our internal worlds, everything going on is like fairly messy, and that's okay. That's life. It's not this curated, what social media would have us want to believe thing, and actually linking that a little bit to Guy's work and models, like as in Guy Claxton. He's so good with creating kind of models and frameworks that we can kind of hang that learning on. But his models and frameworks, I think, you can transfer that from a kind of classroom professional setting and take it and apply it to your life. And I think it's the same with thinking routines. Yeah. Thinking routines can be applied to your own personal growth. So Guy's concept of learning mode and performance mode that he kind of built off a TED talk from Eduardo Briceño, I think that's his name. He's based in Brazil. But Guy from that, as you'll know, Kat, but just in case anyone who's listening who doesn't know about learning a performance mode, the whole thing being that when we're in performance mode, that's all about kind of teaching to the test, passing exams, in which case, when you're in performance mode, you've got to always get things right. Mistakes are bad. It's all that kind of fixed mindset, high stakes. Whereas learning mode is, let's figure this out together. And I wonder if, and mistakes are used as launch pads to new learning. And we take the shame out of that mistake making. And, we can apply that to life, can't we? Can't we just be in learning mode? And I think the same with social media. I get really frustrated with people performing and showing their kind of always curated best selves and kind of look at me and look at my following. What if we just completely smashed that and instead showed up authentically and learned together and collaborated alongside one another? So I think it starts from within, and then we create that power alongside structure learning mode together, in our schools, in collaboration with other schools. So that's what you made me think of there, was that kind of being in learning mode in life.
Yeah. And I think that you talked about vulnerability, and I think that's probably the bit that I struggled with the most, of almost letting down that and getting rid of that armor. Brené Brown talks a lot about armor leadership, and actually those moments you take off your armor and you don't need it, or there are points where sometimes you've got to be like, right, come on. And again, it's the misconception of being vulnerable doesn't mean you're sitting crying in a corner in your office every day. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means you're human. And I think there's so much to be said of just bringing that, that ethical humanness to the job. And, that's something I really struggled with early in my leadership career. And particularly when I first became a head teacher, because all eyes were on me and my school, because it was the first new school to be built in over 60 years in the city and all of those things. And the moment you just say, right, I'm doing my job my way, the moment you forget people are going to talk whatever you do anyway, go back to your values, go back to your why, and let that drive you. And everything else is history, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. And you were talking about emotions earlier on too, and the emotions kind of associated, that teachers associated with their profession and that process. And same thing in kind of leadership in schools. And we're not taught to be emotionally honest. We weren't taught to be connected to all of the emotions we experience, and like the whole spectrum. I was talking about shame before, and anger and guilt, and like having that as part of, the human experience. That's not a normalized thing, so it's kind of getting in touch with our own emotions and being able to hold that with others in a safe, vulnerable, authentic space. So getting towards wrapping things up, because we only got 10 minutes, Kat. So I've got written as the question, what's one action leadership could take to support staff collaboration and well-being? I mean, you've given us plenty, but I'm going to say, if you distilled it into like 3 top things, maybe, what would you say to any leaders who are listening in terms of supporting their staff team with their well-being and to become kind of better collaborators?
Yeah, I think first of all, it takes time. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm in my 9th year as a head, and 6 years of doctoral study. So it takes time to understand the concepts. It takes time to build that culture. Culture is not going to something you can just do. If you're ticking a box for culture, you haven't got culture right. I think that's the new slogan to have. In terms of things that you can do, I think first and foremost is really understand what is well-being. So actually, I don't use the phrase well-being very much within my study, and I use the phrase creating the conditions to thrive instead. And I see thriving as that pathway towards being well. I think the term well-being is thrown around far too much now in today's society. As a school, we're starting to use the phrase wellness instead of well-being. Again, a phrase that is used a lot, but I spent a lot of time in my research really trying to work out what is teacher well-being, what isn't it. And I think for me, what it isn't is things like a duvet day or free tea and coffee in the staff room. That's very tokenistic. Actually, it's about building that culture towards thriving. That is something that we need to focus on. And simple things of doing that is having those open levels of communication across the school, having very good systems for communication, use technology effectively, making sure you spend in time to build relational trust. Talk about your life. Everyone knows I've got a daughter, I've got 2 cats, so I'm surprised I haven't made an appearance actually this afternoon. Be normal, I think, is the big thing. Take off the mask, all of those things that we've talked about this afternoon. Provide collaborative spaces. I think that's really important. Actually, reflect upon all those things that are happening within your school, and you providing that space and time for collaboration. And are you providing that time where people don't naturally collaborate with each other? So there is that element of different ways of collaborating and mixing it up. So you're avoiding those cliques and those always working with the same people, and mixing that up over time, I think, is really, really important. Valuing teachers as individuals. I think that is something that I would really, really stress to school leaders. Listen to their stories. Are there ways that you can actually find out about people and value them as individuals, rather than having, you've got your teaching assistants as a group, your teachers as a group, your leaders as a group. Well, let's, really think about them in a different way. An outcome of my research has been something that I've created called an ecosystem of teacher wellbeing. And that's something that I'm really hoping, once my work is published, that I'll be able to provide as almost like a framework for people to have discussions. And I think if you haven't done anything at all, the first place is to start by having discussion. What makes you feel well? We do lots of different things in our school. We prioritise once a term a professional learning session specifically for wellness, and it's around things like we have our wellbeing wheels out, and people will write that and we go around and share them with each other. They sound like really simple activities, but it builds that sense of we're in this together, we've got this community, this is what makes me tick, this is what makes this person tick, or actually that's going to really annoy you when I do that, or that bit really annoys me, and being really open with those type of conversations. So prioritizing that around professional learning sessions. And when I say professional learning sessions, they're our staff meetings. So again, that intentional use of language across the school. We also have something called our human library, which we make the commitment to have every term within our school as one of our professional learning session. And that's just about honouring lived experience and stories. So we invite both our own staff and members of our community to come and just talk about their story, and we just listen to stories. It is the most powerful thing. We've had this running now for about 5 or 6 years within our school. So the amount of human books we've gone through have been huge. And that just builds that sense of community. It builds that sense of trust across the school. It's really, really powerful. So they're really quick, simple ways of doing it. In terms of other ways of working, is really thinking about how you enact policy. Policy keeps us safe. It's important. We're a state school in Wales, so I am proud to be a head teacher in Wales for Wales. So there is that element of I have to use national policy, because that is that statutory obligation for me as a head teacher in a state sector. However, I interpret that to meet the needs of my school. And I think knowing your school, knowing your school story, knowing your staff, you're able then as a head teacher to interpret that policy so it's right for your school. So instead of just having this blanket, this is what Welsh Government have asked to do, off you go and do, taking that time to share that for staff and again, share the why, like I've interpreted this is what it means for us, this aligns with this vision principle for us as a school, and just slow it down. There's no need to be in that race. And I think if anything at all, taking time for self-reflection, for engaging people in that understanding of relational safety. What does that actually mean? How can my behaviours really add into that as a school community, and what will the outcome be? Taking time to prioritise those conversations are really, really important.
So if I try to distill that, what I'm hearing from that and what I'm feeling from that is, valuing people as a whole person. So finding ways to connect into that in as many creative yet meaningful ways as you can. So I loved what you were sharing about your human library, which then brings in the local community and values that as part of the kind of bigger picture. Having the structures in place that enable collaboration. Yeah. And that kind of feedback and connection. And you mentioned informal learning conversations. I'm just going to link that a little bit to Dr. Culvan Atwell's work as well in building thinking schools. And one thing that really struck me with something he shared was about how important those informal learning conversations are. So, thinking about collaboration as a way of being and the structures that support that. And then as a leader, modeling and being and embodying the values that you want to see lived and breathed. And to do that really well takes a lot of self-reflection, introspection, and self-work. There's a really good book I've got that I would wave if I could. It's behind me, but it's about reflective leadership. I think it's called Hanging the Mirror. And it talks about how we can profess to, let's say we say we value collaboration, or we say we value belonging, and we do lip service to that. We create situations that create belonging and are relational and are collaborative. But if we haven't connected with our inner world and haven't kind of done that work of connecting our shadow with our light, we're going to behave in a way, we're going to think we're behaving in a way that creates that. And then another minute, we're going to do something that works in exact opposition to it. Yeah. So that kind of work as a leader of really understanding ourselves, for me, I've seen that so much in leadership, leadership teams that profess to living and breathing these things, and then they do something completely opposite and they have no idea that they've done it. And leadership teams that are really deeply intentional and know exactly what they're doing and why, and they would be open to that feedback, like you'd said about that vulnerability, and asking your team how they experienced working in Jubilee Park and finding out, do you know what? Some people say they're really overwhelmed when they join our school. Let's do something about that. That's uncomfortable, So, they're being willing to be uncomfortable, Does that sound like a fairly good summary of what you were saying?
I think so. I think you articulated much better than I did.
I just summarised what you said. I just trying to pull it together and then added some bits. So, so wrapping things up, is there anything you would like to add, Kat, that we haven't covered?
Not anything I'd like to add. I just think that make a plea, really, that I feel so privileged to do the job I do. Being a teacher, being a head teacher, I couldn't dream of doing anything else. And I think what comes with that is that responsibility, that I have that individual responsibility to both the children and the adults within my school and the wider community, but to the profession as well. And I think the more that we collaborate outwardly as a profession, the more that we share, and like you said, openly share, not just these posters of everything. And I'm guilty for that sometimes, that maybe, my LinkedIn looking a bit show-offy, but also I'm going to make it a real intention now to post some of the grapples that I'm having, because I have those daily as well, that actually the more we share, the more we listen, the more we understand the stories by which our teachers live by and who they journey with, hopefully the more relational and humane education system that we will have. And that will always benefit the children. So by actually shifting and shifting that focus onto the adults that work within our school context, I genuinely think it will have a bigger impact on the children and the society then in general. So I think my plea is, let's have that collective responsibility and be more open with each other so that we can build a profession that we're all in it for the right reasons. We're all in it because we love it. So let's share that and be positive about it.
What a beautiful note to end on. I'm going to link that in with a quote that I heard from Kate Robinson, so Ken Robinson's daughter, who I heard on a podcast. This has got to be like 4 years ago. And she just said, the only real change comes from the ground up. And it's on the ground, not in the trenches, on the ground with fellow teachers, fellow educators, fellow leaders, parents, communities, children, and working out in collaboration what the best learning can, does, will look like, and doing that with other schools together. And then no matter what policies come in, you figure out, just like you have, how they fit or don't fit and how to articulate how and when that is going to be embedded into your school and context, and then we create school ecosystems that are healing, that are learning organisations, that are collaborative, and really do serve the children and communities that they're there to serve. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kat, for making the time. I'm only slightly disappointed the cats didn't come in, but never mind. Maybe
no, they're not behind me. They're not
very behaved. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how people interact and come back. And if you're watching back on this and you've got questions either on LinkedIn or YouTube, put them in the chat, and we'll come back and respond to them and have a look at them. Thanks so much, Kat. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, Becky.